You're listening to episode 157, a conversation with Crystal Polk, a licensed trauma-focused therapist who specializes in supporting parents in the medical caregiver role. Hello, my friends. Welcome to Child Life on Call. This podcast is a safe place for parents to share their stories about what it's like to have a child that has a medical experience, diagnosis, disease, and or everything in between. We know there's power in sharing stories, and that power multiplies when you can listen to other parents who have walked a similar path to yours. Giving and getting advice is great, but hearing how another parent navigates the complexities and nuances of healthcare is even better. As a child life specialist, my role is to support, validate, and provide emotionally safe spaces for kids and their families, and I am so honored to be on this journey with you. In addition to parent stories, we sprinkle in some expert episodes every now and again that have content for both parents and professionals in the field of healthcare, all with the mission to empower parents to be confident advocates and partners with the care team during healthcare experiences. We're so glad you're here. Hello, my friends. I know that was a bit of a mouthful intro, but I just wanted to put all of the good nuggets that Crystal Polk holds in her hands. She is a licensed and trauma-focused therapist, and I first got to know her when watching the Unseen Caregiver documentary, which really focuses on how parents have this dual role of parenting and then providing care to their special needs or medically fragile child. And Crystal specializes in working with these families. So we talk with her today and get some great tips and tools. She's going to leave you with specific things that you can do today with whether you're interested in seeking out therapy or just want to try some tools today in terms of working through or processing some of your emotions around being a parent who has a child that's facing healthcare experiences. Before we jump into the episode, I wanted to let you guys know that if you are a parent, a child life specialist, or professional working with children, you're going to want the hospital or physician's office or urgent care that you take your kids to have the Child Life On Call app. It is an evidence-based tool designed to empower children and families during medical experiences. And 100% of the child life specialists who have used this app believe that it can help with expanding child life's reach beyond the bedside. And 100% of child life specialists believe it helps parents feel more empowered in their child's care. Learn how to get the Child Life On Call app for your facility or doctor's office by going to childlifeoncall.com/partners. I'm just so honored to have you here today. I got to know you through watching Unseen, the Caregiver documentary that just came out at the end of 2022. And so now getting to chat with you is admittedly a fangirl moment for me. I love what you stand for, what a calming, validating, and advocating presence you are for parents of children who go through different circumstances with their child's health. So would you mind just introducing yourself to our listeners and tell us a little bit about you?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here. My name's Crystal. I am a mental health professional. I do mental health therapy with mostly adult clients and some middle school, fifth graders, but mostly 12 and up. And my focus is primarily on the parent caregiver population, which means individuals who are raising children who have a disability or are medically fragile and kind of feel like some other populations might not relate to them, such as like some counselors or therapists might not know their personal experiences to help guide them through different times. So that's my population I serve. I am originally from Michigan. I went to University of Michigan for my psychology background and bachelor's, and then I went to Wayne State in Detroit and received my master's of social work. So I have a macro perspective, and now I'm here in South Carolina serving pretty much the whole state virtually.
Yeah, that's wonderful. We discussed a little bit before the call the social work background that you have, and I know a lot of the healthcare professionals listening to this just are so grateful for every minute spent with social work. So, I, for one, am very grateful to what you're doing. I think you have a really unique perspective to offer our parents who are listening today. So, I'd love to start off with kind of just a broad question. When you're working with parents and caregivers, what are some of the common themes that you find yourself repeating often and that you see come up with the families that you work with?
Yeah, great question. So mostly when parents come to me, they are either, as we would call, knee deep in, many years or decades into this caregiving role. And they haven't really identified the differences between being a typical parent, where it's from birth until age 18, and then that child has more independence, and then that other parent could do different things with their lives. And the difference between being a typical parent in that situation versus being a caregiver parent, somebody who is going to provide long-term or more intensive support for their child, and how this impacts them is so different that they haven't really realized on their own that they are more than the quote parent. They're also caregiving as well. So just bringing them to that realization that it's okay to identify you as a dual role. You're a parent, yes, but you're also caregiving. So recognizing the stress that comes with that is just so relieving. It's validating, and people just, I see such relief when they're like, oh, that's why it feels different for me compared to my sister, or that's why my friend doesn't feel the same way I do. Well, of course, because they're not also caregiving for their children. So the first step that I usually see and want to make sure that they're accepting that they are caregivers and their role is more than just typical parenthood. So that's the first baby step into, is making sure that most of my clients recognize that their role is different, and it's okay to label themselves and take ownership of that word, because it's powerful when you identify yourself into a community and recognize oh, well, that's why I have all these extra stressors on my plate, and financially, and managing the insurance companies and fighting with the schools or whatever is happening. That's why it feels more stressful for me.
I can imagine too. It's if you were to look at somebody, a neighbor across the street, and they're a parent, and they're also a parent and a caregiver, they have this full-time role. It's almost easier for you to envision it in somebody else first and say, wow, that would be a lot for them. And then you can look in the mirror and be like, this is a lot for me. But kind of just combining those two roles together, and, separating them as well, I think is a really, really unique tool. I love that you do that right off the bat.
I see there's a lot of stages of grief. I always acknowledge that, it's okay to admit that you envisioned and you had a dream or a script in your head of what you thought this chapter of your life might have been or looked like. And it's okay to grieve that now is different. We're not saying that the child is not loved or valued. We're saying that we're letting go of what we once dreamt. And this might have been oh, I hope my son is able to play baseball just like I did when I was in high school. We're going to let that go, and we're going to create new dreams, and we're going to sit with the reality, and moving into that acceptance piece through the grief stages sometimes is really important for some of my clients too. And I think that's a piece that's pretty common for this population. But I wouldn't say it in a way where, they're grieving their child, in particular. No, they're grieving what they once imagined emotionally. And this is typical. We do this growing up, right? I hope I can own a house with a dog and I can visit Paris or whatever it might be. Sometimes you have to let go of certain aspects of your life where you see it and rewrite a new chapter. So you can still have a beautiful book, but your chapter, we need to erase it and rewrite it. So that is really important for me as a therapist, working with them, because I see just more acceptance, and with better acceptance of the reality, we have more attachment with that child, stronger attachment, better, healthier attachment. So it's a win-win for everybody.
Yeah. When parents come to you, what are they really hoping to accomplish? What do you think their main goal is? I know myself personally, when I go to therapy, I have these big dreams. I'm like, I just don't want to be anxious anymore. I just don't want to do this or that. What do you hear parents saying when they come to you, maybe in those first initial meetings, about why they're there?
Oh my goodness. I mean, I don't think there's a right answer to this. Honestly, everyone's so different. There's a need to validate. There's a need to process and express themselves and be heard without judgment. Sometimes a certain situation might feel very annoying, and they wouldn't have the ability to express that irritability or how difficult a situation might feel, because they don't want to upset their partner, or they don't want to be judged, or whatever that situation might be. So just that validation,
Yes.
It's okay for bits and pieces to feel stressful, and it's okay for you to have those feelings, but how do we work through that? Then the secondary are those coping skills that you're talking about. Depending on the person's needs, if I see somebody who wants to feel more confident with themselves in certain difficult situations, maybe it really just varies on that individual person and their circumstances. So if you have somebody whose child is using a feeding tube, or maybe my client whose child has Prader-Willi syndrome, maybe their anticipation about the food and all these other things that are popping up for them, maybe my job is to support restructuring their worry thoughts and focusing on things that are in our control. So just a lot of thoughts, feelings, and overall planning for the hopeful future.
I like that. I think it's easy then for parents to say that the reason to seek out help and support from someone like you, from a therapist, could be as small or as big as they may think it is. But there's some way that a therapist, mental health professional, can meet them where they are. Is there one tip or tool that you've seen work time and time again? I know this is a really difficult, annoying question for you, I'm sure, because it's so dependent on people's circumstances and what they're going through. But I think somebody who's listening to this podcast right now, especially a parent, is curious about therapy and is wondering, can it work for me? And maybe you have a story or a tool that you use with families that you generally see work. Maybe it's right away, maybe it's a week, maybe it's a month later, but what are some of those coping skills that you teach families?
I love this question so much. So, great question. I could probably take up 7 hours answering it. I won't. So first and foremost, if you have experienced a scary situation that made you activated, that you still think about, that's not processed, I'm a big fan of EMDR therapy. So if any listener has experienced a medical trauma vicariously because their child maybe almost died, or maybe whatever the situation might have been, highly recommend researching a licensed therapist who does EMDR. Make sure they're certified appropriately. And honestly, if any listener wants to email me, I could help guide them. If they want me, if they're forgiving of the time and response of my email, I'd be more than happy to, give a thumbs up. This person is licensed and appropriately certified. Big fan of EMDR for trauma-related therapy, because some of the experiences that my caregiver parents are experiencing are traumatic, and it sticks with them more than they know. And in order to deal with the future in a stronger way, in the most positive way that you can, you don't want these strong emotions triggered, right? We want to be the person who is, we're human, yes, but we want to be the person who our, children can lean on. And in circumstances, for example, I'm a parent as well, and I had a situation where I was terrified and for my own child, and so I leaned into EMDR, and it was so incredible. We had another similar experience happen. I would have been triggered, as I would say as a therapist, and instead I felt so in control. I was so neutral, and I took power. It felt wonderful. So I've experienced it personally, but I've also seen it professionally, and I am a huge fan of EMDR. Secondary, I would say we can do so much without even seeing a therapist. I'm a huge advocate for therapists, but we can do so much individually at home. So if you can lean into mindfulness and figure out what kind of mindfulness practice works best for you, I highly recommend that. If you can figure out if journaling works for you, try that. It's going to be trial and error. You're going to have a buffet of options to use, and some things we want on our plate, and other things I'm like, not for me, right? So for me personally, if I journal, I have to focus on the positives, because what happens is if I'm journaling and I'm writing down everything that went wrong, I start to spiral with my thoughts in the next direction. And that's kind of the opposite effect of what I'm looking for. So with my clients, I say, this is what you got to do. It's just going to be trial and error, and listening and bringing awareness is just helpful. So at home, I would say journaling and leaning into the free resources. There's stuff on YouTube. If you find credible places to look, there's great resources for mindfulness and progressive muscle relaxation. I'm a huge advocate for that.
I think those are such beautiful recommendations. And I think I've seen it with myself and with families too, is the more that we practice these things for ourselves, the more we model and instill them in our child and our spouse and our people around us. And giving yourself the gift of consistency and dedication in these practices too is important, because sometimes we can feel like, oh, I'm going to journal for 3 days, and you don't have to say I'm going to journal for 3 months, but give yourself 3 days, and then give yourself 4 days, and then 5, and just these little steps. I think consistency is an important practice with it. And I didn't just read it, but about a year ago, I read Atomic Habits and read it again, and just these small things. So I'm setting myself up for the processes that help me. It's not that I'm journaling every day. It's that I'm putting my pen next to my book. It's that I'm, like setting a timer that reminds me that I want to do it, and just these little practices. And then I just secondly couldn't say more about EMDR as well. I've had personal experiences in which my therapist who's licensed in it has guided me through some difficult things. And it was extremely helpful, to the point where I wasn't able to have words about an experience, to now I can think about it and not have any kind of, physical reactions that I was having before. And it was a beautiful tool, like you said. And I appreciate your generosity of your time and your willingness to help guide people to find someone to, if need be. And I'll include all of that in the show notes too. So hopefully we can field the emails to you and just get people to some good information.
There's websites like psychologytoday.com. So if you needed to use insurance, you could always just use the filter. You can find someone within your area. You can choose anybody in your state, as long as, like, in America. I'm assuming most of the listeners will be here in the United States. You can choose anyone in your state who is willing to do virtual. So you can expand that search out. So keep that in mind. I think that's really helpful, and kind of unknown knowledge. Like, if you're not in the field, you're not going to know that you can see somebody upstate. You don't know that. So keep that in mind, because it's really helpful, because a lot of therapists are full they don't have any availability. But if you find someone more in a different area, there's a likelihood that you're going to be able to see a therapist faster.
I love that. When I watched the Unseen Caregiver documentary, you spoke a lot about some of the bigger systems that are at play against parents. And I don't want to bring this topic up to be a spiral downward, but maybe to be really validating that it makes complete sense that parents are feeling unsupported.
Yeah. So I've lived in 3 different states, and each state has different policies. So when I have checked on each 3 of those states, just out of curiosity, you can see the vast differences in the type of support that the families receive. And sometimes that changes pretty frequently based on whatever policy a politician is advocating for or against. So it depends on the funding, it depends on this, it depends on that. And in the end, I've said this jokingly, but it's kind of true. In the end, these parents, and mostly the people who I see are mostly the females, so mostly the mothers, these parents are changing the course of our policies. So mostly mothers are advocating for more funding and better support and all of the things that should have already been set to help and assist these families and these children, but they just don't exist. Maybe there's foundations and grant funding, but it should be a standard in our society that just doesn't exist.
They're kind of like change makers. I mean,
yeah. No, parents are literally advocating for a different future, and I have such high hopes. I'm not doom and gloom about it at all. I have such high hopes that these parents, who are mostly the caregiver parents, are demanding development and change in a positive way for these communities that are going to impact their children in a positive way. It's going to impact the siblings. It's going to impact the rest of society, because in the end, we need our society to have things set in stone to help provide supports that shouldn't be grant funded. It shouldn't be donations. It should be a standard in our society.
Oh gosh, I love your optimistic attitude, because I too feel that way. I can speak a lot on child life and how so many positions are grant funded, and we only see 30% of families that come into the hospital, and for me, what health inequity that is, that some families can come in and have a totally different experience than another. But I think you're right, because what parents, we've known for a long time that parents who have a child with any kind of special need or healthcare circumstance are fighters, and they know how to multitask and handle things that are incredible. And when they go and they advocate, they're not only advocating for their child, but for the future, like you said, and building these communities of one another, which is just another beautiful part of what can be really beneficial for a parent, is that building community piece.
Yeah. I think it's really, it's powerful. And it's difficult, but it's going to happen. I have really high hopes that we're not going to just hear about random topics that are trendy or attention getting for the news and politicians. But I think eventually we're going to see people listening to the parents who are like, please help us. We don't know how to provide support if I want to go back to work in the community.
Right.
We don't know how to plan for our future without something more, more options. We need more support. I will say that every diagnosis is going to have a different impact. The research, I'll talk a little bit about data. This isn't just my opinions. This is a lot of research that has been done, and not enough research has been done. But I will say not everyone is going to relate to this experience. So one size doesn't fit all for the needs for therapy. So keep that in mind. But I would say overall, it doesn't hurt. I really encourage people to get support, because life is hard. Parenting is hard. And caregiving is hard. So if you're doing all 3 of those things, why not, right? So that's my
I love it. I think we love a data, we love a number, we love a spreadsheet. And I think you're right. It doesn't hurt, can only help. These are big questions and things that have to be acknowledged. And I think the awareness that you bring, things like this podcast, can really be part of that latter picture. And even just at the end of this year, I'm watching a lot of women's health, menopause get a lot of attention right now. And that's exciting for me because it's maybe a topic that hasn't been talked about, which means there's just going to be more in the pipeline. And I think that parent caregiver support can be in that pipeline if we continue to be loud. And it's going to take work for sure. Like you said, it's going to be hard, but I thank you for what you do, for being there for parents in this very niche experience that they're having, and helping guide them through it. I think you're just wonderful.
I'm sorry I went a little bit all over the place, but hopefully that's helpful.
No, it's so helpful. I think that a lot of times when I have parents that come on the podcast, and in some way, if they have created an organization or, fundraised for a wheelchair ramp at the park, or just done these little things, it's inspiring, it's invigorating, and it's part of their healing process too. So I think what you described about, the outlook being optimistic is incredibly meaningful. Thank you so much for joining us on the Child Life On Call podcast. The only reason this podcast keeps on going is because of you and listeners like you. So please join in on the conversation with us on Instagram, Facebook. I'm even on TikTok now, y'all, making a fool of myself. I haven't danced yet, but maybe it's coming. You can find us at Child Life On Call. We also have a website, and that has all of our information about the Child Life Circle, about the Child Life On Call app, and a blog with new information all the time. That's childlifeoncall.com. Thank you again from the bottom of my heart for listening to these episodes and being a part of this community. We are so grateful and so honored to be able to provide this for you.